Hi, my name is Kay, and I am an alcohol and drug counselor for a local treatment center. And I'm here to talk about commonly abused drugs, the relationship that has with mental illness, how to compassionately approach a person who is under the influence of substances, and what to watch out for in terms of maybe identifying risks that are related to that. First, I just want to talk about a little bit of statistics for our area as it relates to the state and maybe the metro area. These statistics are from 2021, which that's a little dated because it's 2024 right now, but you can just imagine that none of these issues have gotten better in the last few years. These are only, especially as it relates to the opioid epidemic, these statistics are only getting higher and higher. And so in 2021, there were 1,286 overdose deaths reported to the Minnesota Department of Health. And that represented a 22% increase from the 2020 total. This averages more than 3 people dying every day from an overdose of any drug type. For the first time since 2014, there were larger percentage increase in overdose deaths in greater Minnesota than the 7-county metropolitan area. So in greater Minnesota, that was a 23% increase over that year, while the metropolitan area only experienced a 20% increase. As you can see, over the past few years, that has, some statistics say every 5 minutes in this country somebody will pass away from an opioid-related drug overdose. Next, I'm going to talk about some commonly abused drugs. I can say that in the greater Minnesota area, we don't walk down the street and see people commonly using drugs right in front of us, right, on the sidewalk, or find people overdosing in the alleys. It does happen, but it is not common. And this is the difference that I would say if you were driving through an area in the greater Minnesota towns, or if you were, as the difference between driving through a town in greater Minnesota and driving through maybe an area in Minneapolis or St. Paul that has just open market drug use and sales. Like, you can drive through areas in Minneapolis and St. Paul and you will see people overdosing on the street. You will openly see people buying and selling drugs. You will see people who are obviously struggling with substance use disorder and in serious mental health challenges. You'll see people in the cities sleeping in sleeping bags and walking all hours of the night. Those are things that are very common in the cities. That's why many just community members in the cities stay ready with Narcan so that they can recognize signs and symptoms of an overdose. They will, many community members, they carry that. There are coalitions in the cities that all they do is deliver the life-saving opioid overdose drugs like Narcan right to their door so that they can help people in the street. Well, it's a little different here in the rural areas. We don't see that as commonly, so which makes us think that there isn't that much of a problem up here. But there is. The difference is it's more isolated to different spots, right? People go to different houses and they will go into select neighborhoods, only travel places at night. We see a lot less walking because people will get rides. But it is an issue. All of these drugs are an issue here. We, at the treatment center that I work at, we see people fail for every one of these drugs in their intake UAs. And so just know that these are all common in our area. Opioids, heroin, and fentanyl. This is a big thing right now because we have the opioid epidemic. This is a deadly, deadly issue. And it's only getting worse because I would say a lot of it has to do with stigma. And people, when they hear in the news or in their community or they see a lack of compassion, and it stops them from wanting to go in and ask for help sometimes. Not every time. A lot of it is just the nature of the disease, right? We say that people in the throes of their drug addiction, it's insanity. Their perception of what's reality and our perception of what's reality as people who are not under the influence of substances is totally different, right? We just want to shake people, and we want to tell them, just stop what you're doing. You could lose your life. You've already lost a majority of the things in your life. People will lose their families, their jobs, their homes, their health, but they will still continue to use. And that's because there's these two principles that people learn when they go to Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, and it's that these two key components are what make a person addicted, right? And it's obsession over their chosen substance and compulsion. And so there's been changes that have happened in the brain that it's as a result of their drug and alcohol use that have kind of taken over the mind. We call it being hijacked, right? The reward system becomes hijacked in the brain. And this specific kind of insanity is that regardless of the consequences out here of what's going to happen if we take that substance, right, is that all they can see is the very next step in front of them, right? So the very next step for a lot of people is to use. You know, if they're stuck in this cycle, this hamster wheel of using, the getting drugs, the using drugs, the finding ways to get more drugs, this is the insane loop that people get stuck on. And this is why it is such a mental health disorder. This is why we talk about it as being a brain disorder, is because they get stuck on a loop. And so opioids, heroin, and fentanyl are a really quick way to fall into that loop. And they're highly, highly addictive substances. We're talking about, we think that addiction happens over a progression, which it does progress as a person is using, but a person could try an opioid, heroin, or fentanyl one time, and their brain could become hijacked. Different people are more susceptible to this issue. They're more susceptible to getting stuck on that hamster wheel, especially when we consider mental health challenges. A teacher in school that I had used to call it's the pains of life. You know, it's a lack of coping skills. When people don't have the skills to deal with the pains of life, it's almost like pushing an easy button, because they can take a substance, especially substances like opioids, heroin, and fentanyl, because it's like pushing an easy button, and all of those pains of life and our worries and our troubles, they just melt away just while they're on that substance, right? And so many people, when they use opioids, heroin, and fentanyl, they will describe it as falling in love. I've heard it being described as, it's just like being wrapped up in a warm blanket, a warm embrace, right? They will use these opioids, and they will feel a rush through their whole body, and it's like a warm embrace, like the best hug that they've ever had, you know. And it's a tricky thing, and the sad thing is that people will seek out that feeling to avoid the pains of life, to avoid mental health symptoms, and they will keep seeking that embrace out. And it's as the nature of using drugs is that they will have to use more and more and more, because their tolerance will go up, because as we use the substance, the same amount doesn't work every time. And so to continue to receive that feeling, people will chase that. They'll chase it to the doors of institutions, right? Hospitals, and many people are letting it take them all the way to their grave, because it's just such an elusive feeling. So physical warning signs of a person who is under the influence of opioids, heroin, or fentanyl is first thing that I look for when I have an idea is those constricted pupils. Pupils will tell you a lot about a person who's using substances, right? Because, for example, opioids will cause a person's pupils to be very small. You look at them and it's almost like there's little dots, and those are their pupils, right? The black parts of your eye. Usually when you see constricted pupils, if you're standing outside in the sun, your pupils will get small, but they will not get this small. And so pinpoint pupils. That's what law enforcement officers, when they're looking at people too, when they come up to the window or when they meet somebody on the street, and they will use their flashlights, right? And they will, many people have experienced this. They get pulled over or something, they will just do a quick once over on the eyes. What they're doing is they're checking your pupil constriction, because when it's dark, your pupils are big. We're trying to let in as much light as we can so that we can see. This is my first sign, right? Is looking at pupils. Really large pupils can be indicators of different substances, but something that across the board you will see with all opioids is that constricted pupils. Some people become drowsy. They seem really tired. Slurred speech. Really slow cognitive responses, right? So we ask somebody, how are you today? You know, it could look like, I'm doing fine, you know. Slow cognitive responses, a long time to think about things, nodding off. A lot of us know that when somebody is sitting and nodding off, that can be an indicator, but it's not only an indicator for a person who's using opioids, which we'll get into that as we go. But nodding off is a big one, okay? Nodding off is something we want to be really conscious and aware of, right? Because if somebody's using opioids to the point where they're nodding, then that is also an early warning sign of an overdose. And so you'll want to keep watch on those individuals very closely, you know, keep checking on them. Don't just let them nod off and fall asleep in the corner and then think we'll come back and check on them later. Because if that is what's happening, then you'll actually it would be safer to engage them, right? Let them know that you're concerned about them, that you continue to nod off, and that you want to just sit with them, right? Make sure that their respirations stay normal, and make sure that when you do ask them a question, whether it be slow response, that they are still responding, right? A person who's around you that's nodding off, I would make sure that you are aware of where your Narcan is for your facility, right? We have the nasal spray, we have injection Narcan. Nasal spray is the easiest because you could keep it in your pocket, you know, when you are helping individuals or you are connecting with them, and I would say to always have Narcan within a few steps reach. I've heard it said too is that people who are only withdrawing from opioids, it's not likely that they're going to die. Very small percentage unless they have underlying issues, other underlying physical issues, right? But it will make you feel like you are going to die. I mean, restlessness, insomnia, diarrhea, and vomiting. And diarrhea to the point where individuals who are withdrawing in a severe way from opioids, like they will have no control of their bowels. Like, it is very common for somebody to want to go to the bathroom, want to get up and go to the bathroom, know that they're going to or not know, and just like, you know, have no control of their bowels. And that is a common thing that can happen for that one symptom can stay for many days prior to stopping using opioids, okay? Severe cramping. A lot of stomach cramping, abdominal area. I mean, like bend you over, take you to your knees kind of cramps. Watery eyes. Large pupils. So this is withdrawal, right? Under the substance, when the substance is still in our system, we're looking at small pupils. Large pupils is an indicator that a person is really, you know, anxious, that their nervous system is just like, they don't know what to do. Their body is just like trying to cope. That can look like large pupils. They're really going through it. Runny nose, sweating, chills, cold sweats, hot sweats, you know, that stuff. Muscle and bone pain. Uncontrollable leg movements. This is across the board. another one of those really, really common opiate withdrawal symptoms. You know, we talk about restless leg syndrome, right? Many people have experienced that, where they just can't get comfortable. It feels like there's something inside of their legs that just, it's so uncomfortable. It's not an itch you can't scratch, but it's just like people can't stop moving their legs. It will keep individuals in withdrawal from sleep. It is one of those things that can just drive a person mad, right? And there are ways to help people through these withdrawals, right? We have what we call MAT treatments, so it's medicated assisted treatment. Many people have heard of things like methadone. I personally, in the center that I work at, and we see a lot of Suboxone, because a person can pretty quickly take Suboxone from the last time that they used. So a person could have that moment of clarity from opiates, and they could think, okay, this is the last time I'm going to use. I'm going to go and I'm going to find some Suboxone that will help this with these withdrawal things, okay? People who are going through a withdrawal, not just with opioids, heroin, and fentanyl, but many drugs, they will become agitated, irritable, and they might come off like that you might be approaching them just to help them and ask if they're okay and see if they need anything, and they might snap back at you, and I would think of it as like a person who has a thorn in their side, right? They're in pain, and sometimes they can't communicate with the person around them that's trying to help in a way that is nice or appropriate. And my advice to somebody in the helping position in this situation would be to give them grace, and if they need, give them space, but continue to follow up and ask what you could do to support them through this process. Because reminding people at any stage of withdrawal or using that you're just there to help, that you just want to help them find a path that is healthier so that they can continue to be around and live their lives with joy and happiness. And they're not always going to be trying to hear that, but sometimes it's a nice reminder for somebody who's coming off of drugs to let them know what the end goal is and to remind them, because craving is such a strong phenomenon that it will pull people's vision away from the end goal and just right back to that hamster wheel of needing to use more. And that's sad, but it is the nature of the disease. Next we'll talk about alcohol. Alcohol is so common, right? I mean, we see it all the time. Many places have bars, more bars than they do any other business in towns that happens. It's commonly accepted because it's socially acceptable. It's legal as long as you're making good choices. But the nature of alcohol is that it impairs us and it also impairs our ability to make good choices, right? It is a poison. So whether we engage in that by just having one drink an evening, or whether we get to a place where we are drinking copious amounts every day, or just binge drinking, that can be drinking for one whole evening, just so much that you black out, or no matter to what degree we're using alcohol is, our body responds to it as like a poison. It is a poison. It's one of the most deadly of all of the substances that we're going to talk about. It just wreaks havoc on our bodies and on our minds. And the most severe cases of alcoholism can result in brain damage. And we'll see people, we have in this state, I believe, 3 facilities that are dedicated to housing and treating people with chronic alcoholism. And when we talk about chronic alcoholism and these facilities, they are not to treat them with the end goal being to see them alcohol free, right? These are housing units where they are fed 3 meals a day, but they are allowed to continue to drink. And these are mainly for people who are experiencing what we call wet brain, right? It is what the brain damage looks like from a person who's used alcohol for many, many years or in large amounts. It causes brain damage, and it causes a cognitive impairment, permanent cognitive impairment, and many of these individuals don't have the ability to even learn the skills to stop drinking, so they're stuck on this hamster wheel permanently. And that's another form of insanity that can happen from addiction. Alcohol, different from opiates in this way, alcohol withdrawal can kill a person. It is one of very few substances that just the withdrawal alone from not having the substance in your system can kill you. And so if you're meeting somebody who you know is a severe alcoholic, or they're using lots and lots of alcohol, these are one of the cases that we will make sure that they get medical treatment for withdrawal. This is why we have detox centers. We have multiple around the state. In our rural area here, we don't have one specifically for withdrawal or for detoxing from substances, but there are detoxes in Duluth. There are detoxes in St. Cloud, obviously in the cities. A person who's heavily under the influence of alcohol or has this chronic alcohol problem, we want to see them in a detox if they're not going to continue to drink. So, for example, somebody comes into your facility, they are highly intoxicated. You ask them if they are intoxicated like this often. Do they experience severe withdrawal symptoms? And many people using alcohol to that degree will know what withdrawal symptoms are. And so you want to ask them and talk to them about these things, because if they're going to be in your facility and they're not going to have access to alcohol, you want to be aware of that, because they may need to go to an emergency room. You may want to have them seen pretty quickly in an emergency room, even before some of these withdrawal symptoms set in, because it's really dangerous. And they will treat alcohol withdrawal with things like benzodiazepines and other medications to help them get through those early withdrawal symptoms. Because one of the main things that you want to watch for alcohol withdrawal is what we call DTs, and that's delirium tremens. And what that is it's a withdrawal symptom that causes people to have hallucinations. They can become violent. DTs are when people are completely out of touch with reality and what's happening. So the lack of having that alcohol in their system is completely taking them from reality into a different one, and it's a nightmare for many people. Cocaine and crack. We think that crack was more of a thing in the 80s, right? When we're up here in rural Minnesota, we don't see a lot of crack. We don't hear a lot about crack, but crack is very much still a problem in rural Minnesota, right? It's very much so a problem still in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. It's a problem everywhere. Crack and cocaine are the same substance, right? They're just a little bit different. Crack is a cook down to a more potent version of cocaine. And it can look like little white rocks, and many people will smoke that. They can use it with needles intravenously. Crack is cocaine dissolved into a mixture of water and ammonia or baking soda and then boiled into a solid substance form. It's smokable, it's faster, it's stronger, but it also fades quicker. And so when you are experiencing a person who is a crack user, we see a lot of agitation, we see a lot of compulsion to get that substance immediately. A lot of that obsession that we talk about on the hamster wheel, this is like the dial is turned all the way up. It is serious. People will do crazy things to be able to get back to that substance because their brain is hijacked, right? We talked about that in the beginning. Their brain is hijacked, and before sleep, before food, before water, like any of those basic needs, it it is above that, right? This person's brain is thinking about, I need crack, I need to get that right away, okay? Cocaine, a lot more common in our area here. There are a lot of people who will use cocaine at bars, and sometimes it starts that way at out partying with the friends, but it is an addictive substance, and so just like any other substance, if you use things over a period of time, or sometimes just one time, they can become addicted to that. And something to watch out for when we're talking about people who are addicted to cocaine, it can be kind of those fast movements. It also causes things like a runny nose and a lot of tics, I would say. We see, especially in the treatment center, people coming in primarily using things like cocaine, is there's kind of those tics, right? We see some of this, we see this. This can also present, as mental health symptoms too, but it also are some indicators that we want to think about. Maybe they're under the influence of cocaine. It's a party drug, and anytime you see people partying in large groups, I would assume that there's probably cocaine users there. Behavior warning signs for that are manic. So we talk kind of like those fast movements, talking rapidly. They can easily become irritated and agitated. Like when you are talking with them, or something very slight might happen, and they can quickly go from that happy, talkative individual to that person who is just like immediately angry. And so it can switch really fast like that. People under the influence of cocaine or crack can become paranoid. They can think that people are watching them, or and it doesn't just mean like they think that the FBI is watching them. They can think that the person next to them is staring at them when they're not, right? They feel insecure about their use and being under the influence of substances, and so they will think that other people all around them can notice too. So they may avoid direct eye contact when they're talking to you. Also an indicator of this, that can be an indication of being under this influence of other substances too. Mainly stimulants. I see mainly stimulants is when people are avoiding that direct eye contact. When we're thinking, we talked earlier, about those pupils. Stimulants, so cocaine, crack, and we'll get into amphetamines. Stimulants, one of those indicators when we're talking about pupils is dilated pupils, right? And this could be, right, when you look at a person, you may just see the blacks of their eyes. You might not see any of the color part of their eyes. Or you might see a person who's standing out in a bright atmosphere, like a bright environment, and their pupils are large. That's unusual, right? Because we talked about earlier, when it's bright in an environment and we are not under substances, our pupils will be smaller. And when it's dark, our pupils will be bigger. And so any mismatch within the environment and the pupil size, those are really good, safe, simple indicators that don't require you asking point blank, are you under the influence of substances? Not everybody's going to say, yes, I did cocaine today, or yes, I just got done smoking crack. But you may be able to tell based off of the behaviors and then some of the physical warning signs. And so some of those for crack or cocaine, like I said, the dilated pupils, hypersensitivity to light, because our pupils are dilated and we're in a light area, it makes us become sensitive, like when we walk out into a sunny day after we've been in a dark room, sometimes we'll, put on our sunglasses. That is what that sensitivity to light can look like. Hypersensitive to sound, to touch. Have you've ever maybe walked or brushed up against somebody or went to touch someone on the shoulder? Also be careful about doing that with people who are on substances without asking them first. Can I give you a hug? Or, just reaching up. And our compassionate selves, we want to think that, that's a sign of care. We might do it without thought. But these are things that we definitely want to think about beforehand, is touching people, because not just with this substance, but many of the substances, especially going through withdrawal, people will become sensitive to touch, and you might touch them and they might jerk back, right? Because sometimes it's just sight sensitivity. It's sometimes withdrawal from substances can actually make physical touch hurt. And so those are things we want to think about. Okay, nosebleeds, this can happen with crack or cocaine use. Decrease in appetite. Okay, stimulants are going to do this across the board, right? There are exceptions to this rule, but most of the time people that are using stimulants will not be eating regularly. And this is also the same with opiates too. Opiates and regular opiate use can also lead in a decrease in appetite, right? So we can see people that are looking very frail, very thin. May also, those signs of, there are other signs of being nutrient deficient, right? And people's skin may become gray or have sores or things like that. All of those are signs that a person might not be getting the right amount of nutrition. Water, too. Because, and what that boils down to is, like I said, the hijacking of the brain. We're not thinking about eating, not thinking about drinking, we're not thinking about sleeping because our mind is consumed and obsessed with using a substance. And so, let's move on. Methamphetamine, pretty common around this area. Many of these drugs are pretty common, but this is one that we hear about a lot more, we see a lot more. Our law enforcement has been working really hard, even lately, all the time, on kind of nipping this issue in the bud, because not only the use of methamphetamine, but the production of methamphetamine, people who are making this stuff, is really dangerous. They're using dangerous substances, and they can get into the air. It can affect and get into things like even such as this rug or furniture. Like this substance can be absorbed by things and then pass on the harmful effects of that in ways that people don't think about, right? It has impact. It can impact children, other adults. Something a lot of people don't know about that, but. So when I think about methamphetamine use, I think about a lot of those, there's some similarities as cocaine and crack. The only difference is that when a person uses methamphetamine, the effects, that stimulant effect, lasts much, much longer than if you're using cocaine or crack. So a person that may use cocaine might feel the heightened effects of that stimulant for a couple of hours, maybe 2, 3 at the most, if they are not using continuously throughout that time. But a person who's using methamphetamine can use one time, and that stimulant effect can cause them to be elevated for many hours. Depends on how potent that drug is that they use. It could be that they're having that stimulant effect for 5 hours, 6 hours. Sometimes it can be as much as 8 hours, 10 hours. Methamphetamine now in 2024 time, it looks different from the methamphetamine that may have been circulating in the 90s or the early 2000s. The chemical composition of that has been changed on the street, but the big difference is people then, they might be able to use methamphetamine and they would feel the stimulant effects of that for days, not just hours. And so that caused people to really slip into a lot of psychosis and lose touch with reality a lot faster because they would stay awake many, many nights in a row based off of using that substance. Now what we see is people will have to use that a lot more often, but they will still stay awake for days and days and days because their brain, like I've said for the other substances, is hijacked. And they will just continue to use and think about using and finding ways to use, how to get money to use, and it's an obsession. A lot of people smoke methamphetamine, and it can produce this smell like a burning plastic smell. And so definitely when you're meeting people in a facility, you want to be aware of that. The fact that if you have these smells that you're coming across that you're not familiar with, especially the smell of burning chemicals or burning plastic, you may have an individual who either just may have smoked methamphetamine or another substance, or they may be smoking it in the facility, which don't count that out either, because we're talking about people who they're obsessed and they're having compulsive behavior. They may sneak into a bathroom and do it. They may sneak into a room where nobody's at and do it, because their mind is not thinking about the consequences to others when they're doing that, which there are consequences to others, because it only takes exposure, even from touching a surface that had a person smoking methamphetamine in that room, can cause you to have exposure. Methamphetamine is very much so something that seeps through the skin, right? Another reason why we may want to be careful about touching individuals who are under the influence of things, because especially touching children, young children, when their people are under the influence of that. Many people have not been aware of how transferable this substance is, and then they may have like child protection services come in and test their children for drugs and have highly elevated levels of methamphetamine in their system, because they don't recognize that it's in their clothes, it's in the rug, it's seeped into the couch, and it's just holding it there like a sponge. Okay, and so that's why we want to be very careful about recognizing and addressing if we are smelling things like that, because it can affect many other people, right? Definitely a good thing to know about that. Loss of weight. We see people who are very thin that are using methamphetamine because their brain is hijacked. They are not getting proper nutrition. And up to 40% of individuals who are chronic methamphetamine users will experience psychotic episodes. So when we're talking about that, we're talking about that loss of perception of reality. So this can happen with many drugs, but especially with the methamphetamine, because it hijacks the brain in such a way that really overstimulates it. And we see a lot of that paranoia happening. We see a lot of delusions happening, because it sets things off in the brain. And sometimes people will need to seek psychiatric help or go to an emergency room due to the psychosis that can be caused from methamphetamine. So a lot of chemicals in that drug. Our body responds to chemicals really differently depending on what they are. And so if you see a person who is experiencing some of those psychotic symptoms, you're really going to want to, we have in our community here, in many communities across the state, we have mobile crisis outreach units. And so make sure somewhere nearby you have posted for yourself or people helping in your facility who to call. Many law enforcement officers are also trained in the ability to recognize psychosis and mental health challenges. And so that could upset a person who's under the influence of substances. Having law enforcement come in, it can feel really threatening, but it's really good to have those options too. So I would start with the mobile crisis outreach team. They will come. They're a little bit less threatening to an individual who is under the influence of substances, but also always keep in mind that law enforcement is another option, and they're very often trained to deal with that too. Keep you safe and keep the person safe from themselves and get them the help that they need, right? Physical warning signs of a person who's under the influence of methamphetamine or has used it for a period of time. This can be severe dental problems. This is not limited to methamphetamine, but we see it a lot more. Due to malnutrition, we can see it with any drug, honestly, and alcohol, and because we're not taking care of ourselves, so they're using substances like that. But we most often see it with people with methamphetamine because it's really common for them to be smoking methamphetamine, injecting methamphetamine, and like I said, there are many harmful substances that are put together to make that drug, and our body will obviously have it going all through our system, right? It goes into our bloodstream, goes into our teeth, it gets into our bones, and it can really have negative effects on that. We're talking about methamphetamine, so this is a stimulant, so we'll be watching out for those dilated pupils, right? They get really big in those environments where it might not match up with the level of light. You'll want to consider that maybe a person might be using methamphetamine. Extreme weight loss, open sores, scabs, or scars on the skin, often referred to as meth mites. And the reason that this happens to people is that there are actually a couple reasons that this happens to people, and it is the fact that I had covered these are really nasty substances, right? And really harmful chemicals that people are putting into their body. And our skin is one of our biggest detox organs in our body. And so our skin is going to try to push these substances out of our body and get rid of them. And oftentimes it will cause burns in our skin, right? Chemical burns. Sometimes people will, you can feel these substances coming out of your skin and out of your pores. And people who are under the influence in that, not really in touch with reality, will consider that these might be bugs, right? They might think that they have bugs crawling on them, but really it is a substance that is coming through their pores. And so, something to be aware of, because that paranoia can really, really give a person fear and really think that that is what's happening to them. And so the best way to support someone in that situation is to offer them a shower, maybe, that will help their body kind of get that off of the skin and help them sweat some of that stuff out. If you're capable of offering them a shower in a facility, that's a really good way to help them through that process. But depending on the level of hallucinated bugs, you may want to reach out to some more mental health people, or maybe even a detox situation too, to help them kind of reestablish their footing in reality and kind of get that substance out of their system. Can be really helpful. Okay, let's talk about inhalants. Ooh. You know, not something we hear about so commonly, but obviously something that people have been doing for decades, long time. We're talking about solvents, aerosol cans, gases. We also have called this, right, huffing. These are really damaging to our body. These chemicals, when we're inhaled, they can affect the density of our bones even. And so we see this as a really common thing in younger people, maybe people who don't really have access to other drugs or know where to get them. Something that's quick and easy that you can buy at nearly any store without an ID are solvents, aerosol cans, hairsprays, whipped cream cans, anything that is pressurized. Not anything that's pressurized, but a lot of those pressurized things that you get in cans have a capability of giving you that high. Just for, it's really quick high, but people who can't afford or don't know where to get other substances, a lot of times they will do things like that. Also, this can also impact people of any age, but we see it most commonly in younger people. This can, not only does this have some major effects on the density of our bones, our internal organs. I mean, we're inhaling chemicals, really nasty chemicals too, and so that gets into your bloodstream and it can get into our brain and it will cause brain damage, permanent brain damage. In a short amount of time, it may look like a person who is under the influence of, it can look similar to opiates. You know, they may be drowsy or nodded off, or it's also a very quick thing, so many people will do it over and over and over and over again in a short period of time. And so there are, it can cause a reduction in our ability to feel pain, right? So a lot of times people will, it causes a lack of oxygen to our brain, which causes people to pass out. And so there are times where people will pass out and they will hit their heads or hit their bodies on something and they will sustain an injury, and then they will oftentimes come back to consciousness and not recognize like what has happened to them in the moments prior to them regaining consciousness. Some physical warning signs, something to look out for inhalants, is nausea. People become nauseous as a result of that loss of appetite. Again, just like some of these other substances, we're talking about our brain is being hijacked, and inhalants can slide right into that first spot too. People won't take care of themselves because they will be obsessed and compulsively doing this. Slurred speech, sores around the mouth or the nose, and we're talking about kind of these chemical burns, right? These reactions to having those chemicals near our bodies and going into our body. A chemical odor. Our bodies are amazing things, right? And like I said, our bodies will try to detox a lot of these substances. And sometimes that can cause even a body odor that is just something you haven't really smelled before. It can really smell like a chemical body odor. Seasoned helpers in the homeless communities and heavily drug and alcohol addicted communities, they will oftentimes be able to smell a person's body odor and be able to tell what kind of substance that they are struggling with, because seasoned people who have a lot of experience in these areas, I mean, there is distinct smells that come with each person's substance of choice that can happen. And a really potent smell can be these inhalants, these chemicals. Also methamphetamines, also synthetic drugs such as like K2 and Spice. I think personally those can cause some of the most potent body odor smells. So smells is definitely something. You can tell the difference between a person's substance use smell and just like run-of-the-mill body odor from not having been able to have access to a shower for a period of time. It smells differently. Let's see. Paint stains. Another physical warning sign can be paint stains on body or clothes or especially face, right? So some of these things and it says paint stains because people will use aerosol spray paint cans, right? And a lot of times they will try to cover it with something that is porous, and they'll be able to kind of mostly keep the paint out of going in as they're breathing it, but it will not stop those gases from going in. And so a person who may have those paint stains on their clothes that probably wasn't out painting somewhere, that is one of those real small warning signs to be able to watch out for a person who might be under the influence of inhalants. So I kind of recapped most of those substances about what those warning signs can look like, but my biggest takeaway from this is you can understand and be able to recognize the symptoms of different substances, and it can be scary. It can be scary to try to connect with someone who has lost touch with reality, or you don't really feel like you can communicate with, but people will sometimes not remember what you say to them, or the resources that you give them, or the help even that you try to give them. But something that any person across the board, whether they are in touch with reality or not in touch with reality, something that they will remember about you is how you make them feel in that moment. And so a person who feels true care and compassion and empathy coming from a helper, they will be more likely to reach back to that person when they have a moment of clarity, when they are in touch with reality, and sometimes when they're still not in touch with reality, because a lot of times people under the influence of substances, stuck in addiction or experiencing homelessness, they just want to feel safe. And when a person can feel safe and they can have their basic needs met, then they have the ability to be able to look past having basic needs met, and they have the ability to set goals for themselves, to dream for a future better than what they're experiencing at that present moment, and just letting people know that regardless of where they're at in their journey, that they are worthy of living a happy life and being connected. But we really, in the treatment community, we talk about connection being the opposite of addiction, because oftentimes people who truly feel supported and are supported, they don't turn to drugs and alcohol, because people who are happy and fulfilled and have their needs met across the board, they reach out for substances a lot less. They're not looking for a way to escape the pains of life because they're not experiencing them day in and day out, right? And so I just want to offer my deepest gratitude to people who are willing to put themselves in uncomfortable situations to help a person who's obviously struggling, whether that's with substance use problems, whether it's with mental health, whether it's experiencing homelessness. Like, it takes heart to reach to the people who are marginalized and to pull them back into our community and let them know that they're supported and loved regardless of where they're at in their lives.